I've seen a lot in my years as a lawman. Things that would make your hair curl, but this one probably takes the gold medal for suburban warfare gone completely off the reservation. It all culminated with me, Sheriff John Rawlins, arriving at my own ranch, in my own cruiser, lights respectfully dimmed, but undeniably present. To find an HOA president absolutely losing her mind and demanding I arrest, well, essentially myself, or at least my interests. How did I get here? How does a grown woman, HOA president no less, end up calling 911 on a property that isn't even in her jurisdiction, reporting phantom crimes, and then throwing a grade A conniption fit when the sheriff she summoned turns out to be the very man whose peaceful enjoyment of his land she's been trying to systematically dismantle for months? Buckle up, folks, because this story is a testament to what happens when petty power goes to someone's head like cheap wine. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had the pleasure of an HOA trying to dictate terms outside their own welcome mat. I'd love to hear I'm not alone in this brand of crazy. It all started, as these things often do, with a dream. My dream wasn't of mansions or fame. It was simpler. A piece of land, some breathing room, a place where the loudest sound was the wind in the cottonwoods, or the distant moo of a cow. After 20-plus years in increasingly urban departments, the grind was getting to me. When the opportunity arose for a lateral transfer to the sheriff's position in more rural Custer County, I jumped. Along with the new job came the search for that dream property. I found it, 100 acres of rolling pasture, a sturdy if somewhat tired old farmhouse, a classic red barn, and a clear running creek. Best of all, it was bordered on 3 sides by established ranch land, and on the 4th, well, that's where the serpent entered paradise, so to speak. The 4th side abutted the very edge of a relatively new, aggressively manicured subdivision called Whispering Pines Estates. My ranch, thankfully, predated Whispering Pines by about a century, a fact clearly documented in every county record you could pull. It was, and always had been, agricultural land, proudly independent of any HOA covenants or the whims of its committee. I checked the plat maps, the deeds, the county zoning records. Twice. There was no ambiguity. My ranch was mine, and Whispering Pines was next door, with a clear, surveyed, and legally defined boundary between us. The first few months were blissful. I spent my off-duty hours patching fences, planting a small vegetable garden, and just enjoying the quiet. My 2 dogs, Blue and Daisy, thought they'd died and gone to heaven. The only whispers I heard were from the pines on my own property. Then the letters started. Innocent enough at first, addressed to current occupant, tucked into my rural mailbox. They were on fancy, heavy-stock Whispering Pines letterhead, embossed with a rather ostentatious pinecone logo. The first was a friendly reminder that all outbuildings needed to be painted in approved community color palettes, and that my barn, a perfectly lovely weathered red, was not in compliance. I chuckled, figured it was a mail merge error, and tossed it. The second, a week later, was more specific. It concerned a magnificent, ancient oak tree near my property line with whispering pines, a tree whose branches partially extended, as trees are wont to do, over the pristine, chemically treated lawn of one of the McMansions on the other side of the fence. This letter, signed by one Brenda Babs McMillan, President Whispering Pines HOA, informed me that the tree was a hazard and shedding debris excessively, and that I was required to have it professionally pruned or removed within 30 days. Now, I love trees, and this oak was a patriarch, healthy and strong. I knew my rights regarding tree branches overhanging property. The neighbor could trim them back to the property line at their own expense if they chose. But the tree itself was mine, on my land, and perfectly sound. I wrote a polite brief letter back to Miss McMillan, explaining that my property was not part of the Whispering Pines HOA, that the tree was healthy, and that while her neighbor was welcome to trim any overhanging branches at the property line, the tree was staying. I even included a copy of the relevant section of my deed description showing my property boundary. I thought that would be the end of it. Oh, how naive I was. That letter, it turns out, was like waving a red flag, or perhaps a non-regulation colored barn, at a particularly territorial bull, or in this case, Babs. It wasn't long before I got my first visual. I was out mending a section of fence that ran parallel to the backyards of several Whispering Pines homes. A woman emerged from one of the larger houses, a beige stucco affair with too many gables and a driveway gleaming with a pearl-white Range Rover. She was dressed in expensive-looking athleisure wear, the kind that screams, "I have a lot of free time and a lot of opinions." She had a visor clamped on blonde, meticulously highlighted hair, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. She stood, arms crossed, watching me. When I glanced up and gave a neighborly nod, she just stared. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. Not subtly, but overtly, aiming it directly at me, then at my old barn in the distance, then at the fence line. I called out, "Can I help you, ma'am?" She didn't answer, just gave a disdainful sniff, turned on her heel, and marched back into her air-conditioned palace. A few days later, another letter. This one cited unpermitted agricultural activity and the unsightly nature of my rusting farm implements, which happened to be a perfectly functional vintage tractor I was in the process of restoring. The tone was sharper, more demanding. It was becoming clear Babs McMillan wasn't just mistaken. She was on a mission. My neighbor to the west, old Mr. Henderson, whose family had ranched here for generations, stopped by one afternoon. "Heard you're meetin' the Queen of Whispering Pines," he said, a wry grin on his weathered face. "Babs, eh? Thinks that HOA election made her sovereign ruler of half the county. Told my son, who lives in that gilded cage, that if she ever set foot on my land, I'd introduce her to the north end of a southbound mule. He warned me she was relentless, power-tripping, and had made life miserable for several Whispering Pines residents who dared to say, plant non-approved marigolds. My situation, being an outsider she apparently wanted to bring into her fold, was a new level of audacity for her. It was becoming less amusing and more of a persistent, buzzing annoyance, like a mosquito you just can't swat. And as a man who valued his peace, and as a sheriff who valued the rule of law, I started to feel a familiar professional instinct kick in: document everything. This Babs character was rapidly moving from eccentric neighbor to a potential, albeit petty, antagonist. I had a feeling the Whispering Pines were about to be drowned out by the escalating shrieks of entitlement. And I started methodically building my file. Every letter, every interaction, noted, dated, and filed. Little did I know how crucial that binder would become. The next phase of what I privately started calling Operation Babs Gone Wild involved a distinct uptick in her personal appearances along my property line. It was as if she couldn't quite believe her sternly worded, embossed letters weren't resulting in my immediate and terrified compliance. I'd be out checking on my small herd of cattle, I'd bought a dozen heifers, just getting started, and I'd see her 100 yards away, sometimes with a companion, another woman who looked equally unimpressed with the concept of rural life. They'd point, they'd talk animatedly. Occasionally, I'd catch the glint of binoculars. It was almost comical, like I was an exotic, slightly dangerous animal in a poorly maintained zoo exhibit. The letters kept coming too, each more ridiculous than the last. One complained about the olfactory impact of my cows. I was on 100 acres, they were well pastured, and the wind primarily blew away from Whispering Pines. But apparently, Babs possessed a superhuman sense of smell when it came to detecting perceived threats to her suburban utopia. Another letter, citing a non-existent county ordinance, demanded I erect a 6-foot solid privacy fence along the entire boundary, at my expense, of course, to shield the delicate eyes of Whispering Pines residents from the visual blight of my working ranch. The cost of such a fence would have been astronomical, not to mention entirely unnecessary. I responded to each of these official HOA communiques with the same unwavering, polite firmness. I'd reiterate that my property was not within their jurisdiction. I'd include copies of plat maps, again, and I'd cite actual county ordinances and state laws that supported my position. I sent these responses via registered mail, return receipt requested. The receipts would come back signed, often with a shaky, indignant flourish that I imagined belonged to Babs herself. I also took the precaution of installing a couple of discreet, motion-activated trail cameras along the fence line. As sheriff, I knew the value of objective evidence, and her increasing boldness made me suspect she might eventually try something more than just officious correspondence. I didn't want this to escalate, but I wasn't about to be bullied. One Saturday morning, I was having a new well pump installed. The old one was failing, and reliable water is the lifeblood of any ranch. The drilling company, a reputable local outfit, had their truck parked on my driveway, well within my property. Suddenly, Babs appeared, not just at the fence line, but a good 20 feet onto my land, marching towards the work crew with an expression of thunderous outrage. Her husband, a timid-looking man I'd occasionally seen mowing their lawn with meticulous precision, trailed a few steps behind her, wringing his hands. I'd nicknamed him Mr. Whispers in my head. "Stop this at once!" Babs shrieked, hands on her hips. "You do not have permission for this commercial activity in a residential zone. This is a clear violation of Whispering Pines covenants." The crew chief, a grizzled man named Earl who'd probably forgotten more about wells than Babs would ever know about anything, looked at her like she'd just landed from Mars. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this here is Mr. Rollins' property. We're putting in a well pump for him, and this ain't Whispering Pines." I walked over from the barn. "Babs," I said, keeping my voice even, "we've been over this. This is my ranch. It's not part of your HOA. Your covenants don't apply here. And you are currently trespassing." Her face turned a fascinating shade of puce. "Trespassing? Trespassing? I am the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I have a duty to protect our community standards. This industrial racket is unacceptable." Her voice was rising in pitch and volume. "Your community standards end at that fence, Babs," I said, pointing. "This is private agricultural land. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd return to your own property." Mr. Whispers tugged nervously at her elbow. "Brenda, dear, perhaps." "Don't Brenda dear me, Gerald," she snapped, swatting his hand away without even looking at him. She turned back to me, eyes blazing. "I have a good mind to call the authorities about this. This is an outrage." "You do that, Babs," I said, my patience wearing thin. "But I'd advise you to be very sure of your facts before you waste their time. And get off my land." She glared, practically vibrating with indignation, then spun around and stormed off, Gerald scurrying after her. The work crew looked at me, wide-eyed. Earl just shook his head. "Heard about her," he muttered. "Lady's wound tighter than a new winch cable." Later that day, just as I suspected, a county code enforcement officer showed up. A young guy, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He sheepishly explained he'd received an anonymous complaint about unpermitted commercial drilling and illegal dumping. I showed him my well permit, the property lines, and explained the situation with my overzealous neighbor. He apologized profusely for the intrusion, confirmed I was well within my rights, and left, promising to file a report noting the complaint was unfounded. Babs was now actively trying to use county resources to harass me. This was crossing a line. My file on Babs McMillan grew thicker. I added a copy of the code enforcement officer's visit summary, my trail cam footage of her trespassing, and detailed notes of the confrontation. The undercurrent of incredulity I initially felt was solidifying into a cold, righteous determination. This wasn't just about a noisy neighbor anymore. This was about abuse of perceived power and a blatant disregard for legal boundaries. I knew, with a sinking feeling, that this was far from over. Babs wasn't the type to back down, especially not after being publicly corrected. She was going to double down, and I had to be ready. The climax of Babs McMillan's reign of neighborhood terror arrived on a Tuesday afternoon under a blazing summer sun. I wasn't even at the ranch. I was on duty, handling the aftermath of a minor fender bender on the county highway, about 15 miles away. My radio crackled to life. "Dispatch. Sheriff, got a 911 call, female caller, hysterical, reporting active timber theft and possible hazardous material dumping." Says it's happening right now on what she claims is HOA common land behind Whispering Pines, near the old Rollins place. My blood ran cold for a second, then hot. The old Rollins place, my place. There was only one hysterical female caller it could be. Address she gave, dispatch? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, professional. Dispatch, read it out. It wasn't my precise ranch address. It was the address of the main entrance to Whispering Pines, but with directions that clearly led to the back boundary that bordered my property. Classic Babs misdirection. Any description of suspects or vehicles, dispatch? Caller stated, and I quote, "There's a derelict old pickup truck and at least 2 suspicious-looking men tearing down historic trees and unloading barrels of God knows what into the creek. Claims, it's an environmental disaster in progress." Derelict old pickup? That would be my reliable, if aesthetically challenged, Ford F-150 work truck. 2 suspicious-looking men? That would be a couple of highly recommended local landscapers, the Rodriguez brothers, whom I'd hired to clear some overgrown brush and remove a couple of genuinely dead, lightning-struck pines well within my property line, nowhere near the creek. They were also scheduled to plant a few native saplings. Far from an environmental disaster, it was responsible land management. "All right, dispatch," I said, my mind already racing. "I'm closer than any other unit. I'll take the call. Advise units to stage. I'll assess and let them know if I need backup. But I want Deputy Miller to respond as well, non-emergency, to my location, for a secondary report." Miller was a solid by-the-book young deputy, exactly who I wanted as a witness. I signed off the fender bender, hit my lights for a moment to clear traffic, then headed towards my own ranch, a surreal sense of inevitability settling over me. How did I get here? This woman, fueled by nothing more than her own inflated ego and a plastic HOA president badge, was now summoning armed law enforcement to my property based on blatant, ludicrous lies. I thought about the months of meticulous record-keeping, the letters, the photos, the trail cam footage, safely stored on my computer. It wasn't just about protecting my property rights anymore. This was about the misuse of emergency services, a serious offense. Babs McMillan was no longer a mere nuisance. She was, in her escalating delusion, actively breaking the law. As I turned down the dirt road leading to the more remote section of my ranch where the work was being done, I saw them. My pickup was parked near a pile of cleared brush. The Rodriguez brothers, Hector and Luis, were working with chainsaws, sectioning a fallen dead pine. And there, practically dancing with agitated fury, was Babs McMillan, dressed in her battle regalia. Today it was pink Lululemon, a crisp white visor, and gleaming sneakers. Her pearl-white Range Rover was parked haphazardly on the grass, straddling what she likely considered the sacred boundary but was, in fact, still well inside my land. She was waving her arms, phone pressed to her ear, undoubtedly still on the line with dispatch, adding more dramatic embellishments to her fictional catastrophe. Her husband, Gerald Mr. Whispers McMillan, stood beside the Range Rover, looking like he'd rather be swallowed whole by the earth. He had that permanently worried expression, like a man perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop, and knowing it was probably one of his wife's designer stilettos aimed at his head. I pulled my marked county cruiser up slowly, parking it a respectful distance away but clearly visible. I cut the engine and took a moment, observing. Babs hadn't spotted me yet. She was too engrossed in her performance for the benefit of the 911 operator and berating Hector and Luis, who were, to their credit, standing calmly, chainsaws off, looking utterly baffled. I could hear her shrill voice, even with my windows up. Absolutely destroying protected wetlands, dumping chemicals. "I demand you send everyone. This is an ecological crime scene." I took a deep breath. This was it. Showtime. I got out of the cruiser, adjusting my duty belt, the weight of it familiar and grounding. As soon as my boots hit the dusty ground, Bab's head snapped around. Her eyes, which had been narrowed in fury at the Rodriguez brothers, widened slightly when she saw the sheriff's uniform. A flicker of triumph crossed her face. Finally, the cavalry had arrived to validate her crusade. She clearly didn't recognize me out of my usual ranch work clothes. "Officer, thank God you're here," she shrieked, bustling towards me with surprising speed for someone who likely spent most of her days in climate-controlled environments. "You need to arrest these men immediately. They are trespassing on HOA common property, illegally cutting down heritage trees, and I saw them. I distinctly saw them, pouring something into the protected watershed. It's probably toxic." She pointed a trembling, accusing finger at Hector and Luis, who just looked back at her, then at me, a mixture of confusion and exasperation on their faces. Gerald, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into the side of the Range Rover, his eyes darting nervously between his wife and the newly arrived law enforcement. He looked like he wanted to apologize for her very existence. "Ma'am," I began, my voice calm, measured, the one I used when dealing with people who were clearly not operating on all cylinders. "Let's just take a breath. What exactly is the problem here?" Babs puffed up like an angry toad. "The problem, officer, is criminal activity. These vandals." She gestured again at Hector and Luis, who were now exchanging quiet, bewildered words in Spanish, "are destroying our pristine natural environment. This land," she swept her arm dramatically, "encompassing my pasture, the creek, which was a good 50 yards away from any activity, and the stand of trees, is protected HOA common area. And they have no permit, no authorization, nothing." "Actually, ma'am," Hector Rodriguez spoke up politely, his English perfect, "this is Mr. Rollins' property. He hired us to clear some deadfall and brush. We're not near the creek, and all these trees were already dead or dying." Babs spun on him. "Lies! Don't listen to him, officer. He's clearly trying to cover his tracks. I am Brenda McMillan, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I know this land like the back of my hand. It belongs to us." She was practically vibrating with self-importance. This was the moment I'd both dreaded and, in a strange way, been preparing for. I looked her straight in the eye. "Ma'am," I said, "this land does not belong to the Whispering Pines Ho. This is private property. It belongs to me." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up towards her visor. Her jaw, which had been working furiously, slackened for a millisecond. "You?" she scoffed, looking me up and down, taking in the badge, the name tag, the uniform. "You're mistaken, officer. Perhaps you're new to the area? This has always been part of the original plat for Whispering Pines. There must be some confusion. The owner of this parcel is a Mr. some absentee rancher." The disdain in her voice when she said absentee rancher was thick. "There's no confusion, Miss McMillan," I said, my voice still even, but with a new edge of authority she was apparently too self-absorbed to detect. "This is my ranch. My name is John Rollins. Sheriff John Rollins." I unclipped my official Sheriff's Department ID from my belt and held it up for her to see clearly. "And these gentlemen are here at my request, working on my land, well within all county regulations and environmental guidelines." The color drained from Babs McMillan's face. It was a truly spectacular sight. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air. The arrogant certainty that had animated her just moments before deflated like a punctured parade float. Gerald, from behind the Range Rover, let out a small, choked sound, almost a whimper. Babs stared at my ID, then at my face, then back at the ID. The cognitive dissonance was clearly causing a system crash. No, that's impossible," she stammered, her voice losing its shrillness, replaced by a shaky disbelief. "You can't be the sheriff and the owner of this wasteland?" The insult was reflexive, a dying spark of her previous hauteur. "This wasteland, as you call it. Ms. McMillan is my home," I said, my patience finally evaporating. "And you have just made a false 911 report concerning activities on it. You've also been repeatedly trespassing, harassing my workers, and attempting to enforce HOA rules far outside your legal jurisdiction for months, despite numerous clarifications and documented proof of property boundaries. In fact," I added, my voice hardening, I have a rather substantial file detailing your campaign of harassment." Just then, Deputy Miller's cruiser pulled up behind mine. He got out, young, professional, and looking to me for direction. Babs's eyes darted to Miller, then back to me, a wild, cornered look appearing in them. "This is a conspiracy," she suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're all in on it together. You're using your position to cover up your illegal dumping. I demand to speak to your superior." That was rich. "Ma'am," I said, my voice now carrying the full weight of my office, "I am the sheriff of Custer County, and you are making some very serious and frankly delusional accusations. You are also, currently, standing on private property after being warned multiple times to leave, and you've demonstrably misused the 911 emergency system. These are prosecutable offenses." The freakout was now in full swing. Tears of rage and frustration started to stream down her face, carving paths through her expensive foundation. "You can't do this to me. I am an HOA president. I pay your salary. I have rights. Gerald, do something." Gerald, however, looked like he was about to faint. He just stared at his wife, then at me, then at the ground, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He knew, I could see it in his eyes, that Babs had finally flown too close to the sun on her wax wings of entitlement, and the fall was going to be messy. "Miss McMillan," I stated, stepping closer, my demeanor shifting from frustrated landowner to on-duty law enforcement officer addressing a suspect. "You knowingly filed a false police report, claiming timber theft and hazardous material dumping. The 911 system is for genuine emergencies, not for settling grudges or harassing neighbors. Your actions today tied up emergency resources and could have diverted deputies from actual crises." Her face was a mask of indignant fury. "It is an emergency. You're destroying the environment. My residents are concerned," she blustered, though her voice was trembling now. "My residents deserve to live without their property values being decimated by your unsightly agricultural activities." "My agricultural activities, Ms. McMillan, are legal, permitted, and entirely on my own land, a fact you've been made aware of repeatedly. Your residents' property values are threatened more by an HOA president who clearly doesn't understand legal boundaries or basic civic responsibility." I glanced at Deputy Miller. "Deputy, please ensure your body camera is active. Ms. McMillan, I am advising you again. You have made a false report. This is a serious matter. Right now, you are also trespassing. I am giving you one final opportunity to leave my property peacefully." Her eyes darted between me and Miller, likely weighing her options, though rational thought seemed to have abandoned her some time ago. This was a classic standoff for her type: admit error and retreat, or double down on the delusion of her own righteousness. She chose the latter, as I suspected she would. "I am not leaving," she shrieked, stamping her foot in a manner that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. "This is an outrage. I demand an independent investigation. You can't intimidate me with your badge. I have lawyers. Very expensive lawyers." She then made a critical error. She lunged towards Hector Rodriguez, who was still standing quietly by his truck, and tried to grab his arm. You're going to tell them the truth." Hector recoiled, startled but thankfully unharmed. That was assault. Coupled with everything else, it was more than enough. "All right, that's it," I said, my voice firm and decisive. "Brenda McMillan, you are under arrest." Deputy Miller stepped forward instinctively as I spoke. Babs froze, her hand still outstretched. "Under arrest?" she stammered, as if the words were in a foreign language. "For what? For protecting my community?" "For misuse of the 911 emergency system, California Penal Code Section 148.3, for false reporting of a crime, Section 148.5, for trespassing, Section 602, and now, for assault, Section 240. I recited, the codes coming readily to mind. "Deputy Miller, please secure Miss McMillan." The pure, unadulterated shock on Bab's face was something I'll likely never forget. It was as if the entire universe, as she understood it, had just tilted on its axis and thrown her into an alternate reality, where HOA presidents were not, in fact, above the law. You can't be serious," she wailed, as Deputy Miller gently but firmly took her arm. "I am the president. I demand to speak to my husband. Gerald." "Gerald, don't just stand there, you useless twit. Call our lawyer." Gerald, who had been observing the scene with a sort of horrified paralysis, finally seemed to find his voice, albeit a very small and quavering one. "Brenda, perhaps you should just cooperate," he pleaded. "No, I will not cooperate with this charade." She started to struggle as Miller attempted to handcuff her. "Unhand me. This is police brutality. I'll sue every one of you. I know people. Important people." It was the full Karen meltdown, complete with threats, tears, and a complete detachment from reality. Miller, to his credit, remained professional and patient, using minimal force to secure her hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet air, punctuated only by Babs's escalating sobs and indignant protests. "I hope you're happy, Sheriff." She spat at me, mascara now running freely down her contorted face, her expensive pink athletic top now slightly askew. "You've just made a very powerful enemy. Whispering Pines will hear about this. The media will hear about this." "Ms. McMillan," I said tiredly, "the only thing Whispering Pines will hear is that their president was arrested for breaking several laws. After months of documented harassment and a blatant disregard for clearly established property lines. And yes, the media might be interested in that. As for your status as a powerful enemy, frankly, I deal with actual criminals who are far more intimidating than an out-of-control HOA president." I turned to Hector and Luis. "Gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for this interruption and for Ms. McMillan's behavior. Please, continue with your work. You are perfectly within your rights." They both nodded, looking relieved but still somewhat stunned. Hector managed a small smile. "No problem, Sheriff. Just another day in paradise, eh?" I had to smirk at that. "Something like that, Hector." I then addressed Gerald, who looked like he was about to dissolve into a puddle of anxious sweat. "Mr. McMillan, your wife is being transported to the county jail for booking. She'll be afforded her right to a phone call. You can follow us down there if you wish." Gerald just nodded numbly, his gaze fixed on his wife, who was now being guided, still protesting loudly about her rights and the injustice of it all, towards Deputy Miller's cruiser. The sight of Babs McMillan, the self-proclaimed queen of Whispering Pines, her Lululemon-clad posterior being eased into the back of a patrol car, was a moment of profound, almost surreal justice. The file I had so meticulously compiled would now become evidence in a criminal proceeding. Her own 911 call, a masterpiece of fabrication, would be her undoing. She had built her own cage, bar by self-important bar, and then willingly walked right into it, slamming the door behind her with a flourish of manufactured outrage. It was, in a word, spectacular. The ride to the Custer County Sheriff's Office and Detention Center was, I imagine, quite uncomfortable for Babs. Deputy Miller later reported she alternated between furious, tearful tirades about her rights, her social standing, and the incompetence of law enforcement, and stony, indignant silence. Gerald, Mr. Whispers, followed in the pearl-white Range Rover, driving about 10 miles under the speed limit, looking utterly defeated. Once at the Sally Port, the booking process began. Fingerprints, mugshot, the surrender of personal effects, including, I noted with a touch of grim satisfaction, her oversized designer sunglasses and the keys to the Range Rover. Her protests continued, though they were becoming more subdued, perhaps as the reality of steel bars and concrete floors began to penetrate her bubble of entitlement. She demanded her lawyer, of course, which was her right. She also demanded a private cell, special meals, and an immediate audience with someone in charge who understands how important this mistake is. The booking sergeant, a formidable woman named Janice Kowalski, who had seen and heard it all in her 30 years on the job, was thoroughly unimpressed. "Ma'am," Sergeant Kowalski said in her gravelly, no-nonsense voice, "you'll get your phone call. Until then, you're just another booking. We don't have special cells for HOA presidents." Babs looked like she might explode. The ignominy of it all was clearly a bitter pill. Meanwhile, news of the HOA president's arrest for calling 911 on the sheriff's own property spread through Whispering Pines, like a wildfire fueled by social media and gleeful gossip. My phone started buzzing with texts from Mr. Henderson, my rancher neighbor, mostly consisting of laughing emojis and offers to buy me a steak dinner. Apparently, several other Whispering Pines residents, emboldened by Babs's public downfall, had started calling their other board members, demanding answers and, in some cases, resignations. The HOA board, from what I gathered, went into immediate crisis mode. The enablers who had previously nodded along with Babs's every decree were now frantically trying to distance themselves from her actions. The carefully constructed facade of serene, orderly suburban governance was crumbling. The legal fallout for Babs was significant. I didn't drop the charges. Misuse of 911 is a serious drain on resources, and her pattern of harassment couldn't be ignored. The district attorney's office, presented with my meticulous file, complete with dated correspondence, photographs, trail cam footage of her trespassing, witness statements from the Rodriguez brothers and Earl the well driller, and, of course, the recording of her hysterical 911 call and Deputy Miller's body cam footage of the arrest, moved forward with prosecution. Babs hired a high-powered lawyer from the city, of course. There were attempts to paint her as a civic-minded citizen, merely concerned about environmental issues, a victim of an overzealous sheriff with a personal vendetta, but the evidence was overwhelming and objective. Her own words and actions were her condemnation. In the end, Babs McMillan pleaded no contest to misdemeanor charges of misuse of the 911 system and trespassing. The assault charge against Hector was dropped as part of the plea, likely because Hector, a decent man, indicated he just wanted the whole thing to be over. Her sentence included a hefty fine, a probationary period, mandatory anger management classes, which I privately thought was an excellent addition, and a court order prohibiting her from contacting me, my family, or anyone working on my property. She was also, unsurprisingly, forced to resign as president of the Whispering Pines HOA in utter disgrace. The HOA itself, shaken to its core, underwent a period of soul-searching. The remaining board members, eager to avoid any further scandal or potential civil liability, my lawyer had, at my instruction, sent them a polite but firm letter outlining the potential for a civil suit for harassment and damages if the HOA didn't take corrective action regarding their former president's conduct and its impact, quickly moved to issue a formal, public apology to me. They also instituted new training for board members on understanding legal boundaries and the proper scope of HOA authority. The Whispering Pines Code of Conduct was revised, with a new emphasis on respecting private property rights outside their domain. The reign of Babs was officially over. In her place, a retired schoolteacher, a quiet woman named Mrs. Gable, who was known for her love of gardening and sensible shoes, was elected as the new HOA president. The tone of communication from Whispering Pines changed dramatically. The officious, embossed letters stopped. My new well pump worked perfectly. My cows grazed peacefully, and the magnificent old oak tree continued to stand tall, unmolested. The only debris it shed was its acorns, which the squirrels seemed to appreciate. The ranch finally became the sanctuary I'd envisioned. Sometimes old Mr. Henderson would see me out and holler over, "How's life on the quiet side, Sheriff? Heard the whispers ain't so loud no more," and we'd share a laugh. Looking back, the whole Babs McMillan saga feels like a bizarre fever dream. I never wanted conflict. I just wanted to live peacefully on my own land, a desire I think most people can understand. But Babs, in her misguided quest for absolute control over her perceived domain, forced a confrontation that ultimately led to her own undoing. Her audacity in calling 911 to report phantom crimes on my own property, and then to demand that I, the sheriff, arrest my own employees and effectively sanction her delusions, was a masterclass in entitled arrogance. It was frustrating, it was time-consuming, but in the end, the system, the real legal system, not Babs's imaginary kingdom, worked. My professional life and my personal life collided in a way I never anticipated, with my skills as a law enforcement officer proving unexpectedly useful in defending my own doorstep. It's a testament to the fact that no one, no matter how important they think they are or what fancy title they hold, is above the law. It also taught me that meticulous record-keeping is your best friend when dealing with unreasonable people. That binder of evidence was worth its weight in gold. The quiet satisfaction of seeing Babs face consequences for her actions wasn't about revenge for me. It was about the restoration of order and the reaffirmation of boundaries, both literal and legal. And perhaps there was a small, grimly satisfying element in witnessing someone so convinced of their own superiority have their world comprehensively rocked by the very rules they thought they could bend to their will. The broader impact was a more peaceful, respectful coexistence between my ranch and the Whispering Pines community, a benefit that extended to other residents who had likely suffered under Babs's petty tyranny in silence. Sometimes the biggest bullies crumble the fastest when faced with genuine, unwavering authority backed by facts. So, that's the tale of how HOA Karen, President Babs McMillan, called 911 on my ranch and ended up in the back of a cruiser, completely freaking out when she realized the sheriff she was trying to order around was the very guy whose life she'd been trying to make miserable. It was wild. It was weird. And frankly, it's a story I almost wouldn't believe myself if I hadn't lived it and documented every ridiculous step. What's the craziest encounter you've had with an overzealous HOA or a neighbor who thought they owned the whole street? Drop your stories in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious. And if you enjoyed this little slice of rural justice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of when bureaucracy, entitlement, and just plain craziness collide. Trust me, there are always more stories.